Hello and welcome to Smaulgld's Top Foreign Holders of U.S. Treasury Securities update for the month of July 2017. The U.S. Treasury Department released its data for the month of July 2017, and China retained its place as the top foreign U.S. Treasury holder. They have added $176 billion worth of U.S. Treasury securities in 2017. They added another $19.5 billion in U.S. Treasury securities in July. Before I read the rest of the headlines and take a look at the charts, keep in mind the alternative financial media has been running with a story which has reversed for the last 7 months that foreigners are dumping U.S. Treasuries. There's stories out daily on de-dollarization, dumping U.S. Treasuries. I'm going to show you the data. That was true. That hasn't been true for months. They're going on an old narrative. They haven't looked at the data. They just repeat themselves. They listen to each other, and they say the same thing, dumping treasuries. The data indicated that. It no longer indicates that since October, November of 2016. In June, China had added $44.3 billion in U.S. Treasuries. No one took note of it. We did, and we noticed that they passed Japan last in June on the last report as the world's top foreign holder of U.S. Treasuries. Now, China has $1.166 trillion in U.S. Treasuries at the end of July, and Japan is somewhat close behind at $1.113. Russia, another country that's supposedly dumping U.S. Treasuries, they added another $200 million of U.S. Treasuries in July, bringing their total to $103.1 billion. Now, Russia's never really had that many U.S. Treasuries, but they've added a substantial amount in recent months. Other BRICS nations, the ones that are supposedly so hostile and so upset with the United States, they've also added to the U.S. Treasury holdings over the last 7 months. We'll take a look at their numbers. Japan added $22.3 billion in July 2017. China and Russia have been rebuilding their U.S. Treasury holdings since the fall of 2016. Now, that increase coincides with rate hikes by the Federal Reserve, 3 over the last 8 or 9 months, and a new Trump administration. One of the reasons I had been predicting rate hikes when everyone was saying they wouldn't raise them in 2015 and 2016, one of the reasons I said, and I'll give you the links below, was that yes, foreigners were dumping U.S. Treasuries and they needed to make Treasuries more attractive by paying a rate of interest. Look at the Chinese holding of U.S. Treasury. There's your dump, and it stopped. Now, this is a trend. When you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months in a row of adding Treasuries, you can no longer say they are dumping Treasuries. That's China. $107 billion added this year. Russia. Yes, dumping treasuries. Not here, they're not. This is the highest level they've had going all the way back to October of 2014. Yes, Russia did dump their treasuries. Look at that. In response to sanctions over Crimea. And still, their U.S. Treasury holding position has increased substantially since October of 2016. Let's look at the overall situation. Foreign holdings U.S. Treasuries since November up $225 billion. So it's not just Russia and China adding to Treasuries. Brazil has added $17.2 billion during that time period. India, these are your BRICS nations, $17 billion in U.S. Treasuries. So we do see substantial increase in U.S. Treasuries. Here's some further reading. As I mentioned, my issue, again, I have a different point of view than a lot of people are saying that the Fed is going to crash the dollar because they want to protect the stock market. They want to protect the too big to fail banks. I don't agree with that. I say the Fed is number one job is to protect the dollar, because without the dollar, the stock market doesn't mean much. The too big to fail banks can't run their game unless they have the dollar. So I believe that the Fed runs the game primarily to make sure that the dollar maintains its hegemony over the other currencies. Now, I don't have a chart here, but I had one last time. I showed the U.S. dollar index. Everyone's talking about the 10-12% drop in the dollar index. But they have to remember that the dollar index rose from the 70s and 80s during the QE and took off like a rocket from there all the way up to well over 100. Now it's at 92, so it's come down a bit, but that's strategic. The US wants a lower dollar because the Trump administration thinks that they're going to export stuff and they want a lower dollar. So it's not like they're dumping the dollar. That's what people want to believe just because they see the dollar index going down. So you hear that repeated. Here are the links if you're interested. Does the Fed need to raise interest rates to combat de-dollarization initiatives? I wrote that in April 2015 when they were dumping. The Fed will raise rates this year, June 2015. Why the Fed raised interest rates when they actually raised them in 2015 and everyone was saying they can't, they never happen, the whole world would collapse. Then in May, people were saying one and done. I said, no, the Fed raised them last year and they'll do it again this year if they have to. I mentioned how the Fed manages the dollar and avoids collapse. So in any event, none of this is a surprise to me because when you do raise interest rates and every other country has negative interest rates or flat interest rates, it doesn't matter they don't like the United States. It's still the best deal for them. I know gold is a great deal for them, but that's not what they're doing. They're not buying gold. They are adding treasuries to their reserves because they know that's what's liquid. That's what they get to use in international transactions. They may not like it, but they put up with it. Let me have your thoughts. Tomorrow I'll have the Indian silver import numbers, looking pretty good on those. And we've got the Shanghai Gold Exchange, good numbers there for July. And a few more stories during the week. Canadian Mint, I still have to do that. The gold and silver through the first half of the year. They finally released those numbers a week or so ago, and I haven't gotten around to publishing them. Thank you very much for listening.